My name's Tom Jennings and this is the 24 Frames Cast, and this week's episode is going to be a bonus episode on a subject which I am certainly not the first to the party for, and there are no doubt many other places online and on YouTube or what have you which will do a better job of breaking down the subject I'm going to go into next. But this is one that's been based on some personal observations and some recent UHD upgrades, and I say that in inverted commas, that have come to me from a label which I really used to have in such high regard that slowly seems to be eroding somewhat. So, what am I talking about? Well, if you've been listening to the podcast recently, you will know that in this year I have made a real effort to spend more money on physical media, and especially not just buying stuff off Amazon, but to go into kind of bricks and mortar places. For my kind of personal shop of choice when it comes to Manchester is FOP off Market Street, which is an offshoot of the HMV chain here, and I really do like going into FOP, picking up a bunch of Blu-rays, UHDs, what have you, having a chat with the knowledgeable staff, and feel like I'm doing my bit to not only kind of contribute to the high street, but also kind of put some money towards the boutique labels who do a fantastic job of keeping the physical media alive. And I really do feel like it's something that as a film fan I want to support. I've done quite a lot of tests of late where I've looked at kind of films that I've bought off iTunes or streaming, especially Netflix, and then compared them to physical media, and they simply don't stack up. And that's why I think it's really, really important that we still do have Blu-ray labels and boutique labels, whatever you want to call them, doing their thing. And this year, I've been really, really surprised with Radiant's releases. Now, a lot of the time I rent their Blu-rays from Cinema Paradiso, but I've been making a point of buying a lot of them, especially when they're in things like 2 for £22 offers. And consistently, they are the label for me that does the best transfers, perhaps not the best features. I think that crown really needs to go to Arrow this year. Just looking at my collection now, I've really been impressed with the packages they've been putting together. Excalibur, Westworld, Hard Boiled, Inner Space, The Killer, even Spaceballs. Yes, I upgraded Spaceballs to UHD, and a lot of fun I had with it too. But there is one label that used to be synonymous with quality, and it has brought about the most disappointing releases that I've seen on any format in a good long while. And unfortunately, I am talking about Criterion. Now, I used to pay a king's ransom to have Criterion DVDs and Blu-rays imported into the country. Indeed, I remember when I picked up Rushmore on the Criterion DVD, and this must have early 2000s, surely it must have been, and I paid over £60 for it. And invariably, when I was ordering these, I'd always get stopped I'd always get a note through from the post office saying I had to go in and pay the import tax, which would chuck another 17 quid on. But I didn't mind, because I did honestly believe that Criterion was the benchmark by which all home media was supposed to aspire to. And there were the occasional purchases where the film I didn't really enjoy that all that much, but for the most part it was a fairly decently curated series of releases that took you the length and breadth of cinema. We had, very famously, Armageddon was released on Criterion, and we had that, and it's also the label that got me interested in the likes of Akira Kurosawa and Andrei Tarkovsky. And I've always been very keen to support Criterion, so obviously when it brought out its UK subsidiary, I had absolutely no problem in buying whatever they were releasing. I like seeing my Criterion Collection extending on my shelf, which is a good reminder that I am very quickly running out of shelf for all my films, and there are seemingly piles of them everywhere at the moment, and I'm sure all kind of physical media collectors can empathise with that problem. So the rot, I think, started when I picked up Sorcerer on UHD, and this was a release I was extremely excited for. Sorcerer is one of my all-time favourite films, and I'd picked up the Blu-ray of it, which was released a fair while ago, which wasn't put out by Criterion. I think it was put out by Entertainment One or something like that, and I really, really liked how that it looked and sounded, I have to say. I thought it was a pretty damn good release. It was the first time, I don't think it ever got a DVD release. In fact, I'm pretty certain it never got a DVD release here. So it was the first time I was able to actually own it on physical media, and that was back in 2017. I thought, as I said, the print would look good, and the sound, especially the 2.0 mix, which was the original Dolby Stereo mix, sounded brilliant. So I was overjoyed when Criterion announced they were going to be putting out a special edition, well, I suppose special edition, but a Criterion edition that was filled with extras, and I dutifully went out, purchased it, completely blind buy. I didn't even bother to check any other reviews or anything like that of it. Got it home, chucked it on to threw it into the UHD player, and I looked at the image, and something felt very, very off about Sorcerer. I had seen a presentation of the film a few years ago when it was given a re-release in the cinema, and I thought it looked pretty great then. And as I put the disc in, I immediately noticed that the colour grading for the film had adopted a teal and orange tint, and no matter how much I looked at it, I could not help but be distracted by this piece of regrading revisionism. And sure, that the image definitely had a higher fidelity. It was certainly that there was more detail in the image to a degree, but the colour palette was decidedly off for me. And it kind of marred my enjoyment of it, because I put back on the original Entertainment One Blu-ray that I had, and I way preferred that colour grading to the Criterion one. And I have found that with UHD that there is a degree of my appreciation for it which I think is something of a placebo. I instantly assume that's because it's UHD, it's got to look better, and it is kind of a self-con, because in the case of Sorcerer, no matter how many times I watched it on the Criterion release, which I also put in the Blu-ray to kind of give it, that came with the film, to give it, because sometimes the Blu-rays do look slightly different on these packages, I've noticed. And again, I just thought the film did not look right. And what you often see on the back of the presentation, they say it's director approved or something like that. And I'm not sure how much of this is true. I think perhaps what was actually approved will be the restoration that's done from the negative and not the colour grading. That would be my suspicion, and I need to do some research that if the case, because I simply don't believe that William Friedkin, before he died, would have signed off on this as being acceptable. I simply don't see it. I think it is very much a decision that has been made by Criterion to quote unquote give these films a modern look. And I don't think in any way, shape or form people who are buying these discs are the type of people who you need to be placating with a modern looking release. I simply don't believe that they need it. And it kind of bothers me, because if I'm buying something like this, and let's not forget as well, the price point for a Criterion dual UK UHD Blu-ray release is about 30 quid. You can get them when they come down in sales, and sometimes they do come in like 2 for 1, like 2 for £50 offers or whatever. But for the most part, if you want them on the day they come out, you will be forking out 30 quid, which I do think is actually quite a lot. It's quite a lot, but you can kind of think you can excuse the amount of money if it really is a restoration that I think people have taken a great deal of time and expense over and are trying to be faithful to what has come before. And there's so much debate around this, because I dare say if you watched the film in 1977 when it came out, there would have been changes made to various re-releases and what have you. But what Criterion put out for Sorcerer, quite frankly, I thought was substandard. Certainly not in the sound department. It did sound incredible, and it was loaded with some great extras that I really, really enjoyed, including the excellent Friedkin Uncut, which is a pretty decent film in its own right at 107 minutes. And also as well, it has that brilliant interview with William Friedkin and Nicholas Winding Refn, in which Friedkin almost falls off his chair at some of the claims made by Nicholas Winding Refn. But overall, I was hugely disappointed with what Criterion decided to do. And this was again compounded when I picked up Arthur Penn's Night Moves. Now, I have the over here, it's the HMV exclusive collection, which is the same as the Warner Archive releases that we've had in America. And now we've got Warner Archive in the UK, so I fully expect, I think Night Moves will probably get a re-release on the Warner Archive here. But Criterion, again, went back and they did a UHD Blu-ray special edition, and being quite a big fan of that film, I was keen to pick it up again. It also became loaded with extras that the previous DVD Blu-ray version that I had didn't have, and I thought, why not? I'll double dip. And I am a big fan of sometimes quadruple dripping. There are certain films that I have bought, such as 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I had on a pan and scan special edition VHS, although how you can pan and scan 2001 and call it on a special edition is beyond me. I then upgraded that to the cubic DVD that came out, which was absolutely blew my mind, seeing it in widescreen for the first time. And then it got upgraded to Blu-ray, and it blew my mind again. And then I got it on UHD, and it blew my mind again. So I don't have any problem with upgrading releases, if that is that there is a marked improvement on the last one. So again, I dutifully put in the UHD of Night Moves, and to say the image was grotty would be an understatement. I literally became distracted by how awful I thought Night Moves looked. Again, Criterion had decided to adopt this teal and orange look to the film, which I don't think is in any way, shape or keeping with the story that is being told. I don't think it has anything to do with the original intention of the filmmakers. And again, it was another piece of revisionism being done to give it, quote unquote, another modern look. And it was genuinely hard to look at the UHD presentation of the film and, without wishing to sound melodramatic, feel that it was actually ruining the experience of the film, because I double checked to see how the original Blu-ray that I had looked in comparison, and it was night and day better. The Blu-ray that came with the Criterion edition as well, I think it looked even worse than the UHD. And again, there's improvements in certain areas. Certainly, the clarity of the image that you're seeing, it is, I suppose, better for whatever that means. But this is in no way, shape, or form an upgrade on the previous presentations of Night Moves. Yes, it has more special features, but I would definitely forgo special features if the look of the film was tip-top, which in this case it simply isn't. You are not getting anything. You are not getting any added value from buying the UHD of this film, unless you are, of course, desperate for those extras. But on the whole, if you owned Night Moves and you weren't bothered about those extra interviews and stuff, which in fairness I wasn't. I just thought I naively went into the film thinking just because it was on a UHD it was clearly going to look better, and it didn't. And again, I wonder who has approved these decisions and for who do they think they're doing this for, because it certainly isn't for us, the consumer. And after doing a little bit of digging online, I certainly wasn't the only person who was finding these particular releases disappointing. Although I was reading some reviews that were absolutely glowing about. I mean, there was one I read where Night Moves, the reviewer gave it 5 out of 5 and said it was an absolute masterpiece of the format. And I just wonder, and I'm going to sound incredibly far up my own arse here, to what degree these people understand about the aesthetics of cinema, because part of me does suspect that a lot of the sites that review these releases are giving them as screeners and don't want to upset the apple cart. And if someone was bunging me free stuff all the time, especially from these labels, and if anyone is listening, I will gladly take anything you can throw at me. I guess there is a kind of reluctance to potentially trash and antagonise the people who are being so generous with these screeners. So Night Moves was part of what I would call the terrible Criterion releases. And I thought to myself, it can't really get much worse, especially that and Sorcerer. So this year, one of my all-time favourite films, Network, came out on Criterion, and I own the Arrow release of Network on Blu-ray, and I thought, right, I'm going to upgrade Network. Now, I haven't seen Network in many, many years, and I was really pleased when I saw the specs for the disc that there was going to be a ton of new extras and what have you, and I made the conscious decision. I thought, right, I will definitely pick up Network when it comes out because I love the film, and again, I really like showing some kind. I love the film, and obviously I wanted to support Criterion, and again, in went Network. Now, having not seen it for a while, I'm supposed to talk a little bit about Network because I suppose whilst I'm on the subject, I can't help myself. How pathetic I found this film to be. And one thing the film does is it kind of predicts the downfall of television from, especially kind of from a news point of view, from the idea of just objectively reporting news to turning it into some kind of spectacle that is needed to get ratings. And it reminded me of a time of when I was in America during the Obama years, and there was a report on the television about a E. coli outbreak at an asparagus farm. And it was somewhere in Texas, and it was fairly kind of innocuous. Anyway, obviously Fox thought that this story was a good way to mine some outrage about the president. So the next day, they had brought on a anti-terrorism expert to talk about the probability of Al-Qaeda managing to release E. coli into the food chain. And there was this expert who, to this day, I'm not quite sure what his credentials were. It just said anti-terrorism expert, but he didn't appear to have, he wasn't kind of introduced as having like, I don't know, being a kind of a lecturer somewhere or having like former military experience. And he went on to very confidently say that the targeting of things like asparagus farms with E. coli would be a really good tactic. So then the anchor decided that obviously that if they could spot that E. coli could be released into the food chain, why hadn't President Obama? So they concocted this kind of fictitious way in which terrorists could poison Americans, and then began blaming President Obama for not doing anything to protect them from the fictional situation they had just invented. And they both managed to spend the next 15 minutes working themselves up into an outrage until they put their opinions to the callers, who were equally irate with the president for not protecting them from this purely fictitious terrorist attack. And it was truly gobsmacking. And when you watch Network, you sort of see the seeds of this nonsense in the story. And watching Network again, I just found this film so entertaining, and it goes without saying that it is one of the shining lights, really, of the new Hollywood movement and that series of such wonderful cinema that we had in the 1970s. But I did find there was one thing about the film which occasionally drew attention to itself a little bit too much. Now, obviously, it is a film, and it has obviously a screenplay written by Paddy Chayefsky, and for the most part everything works until there are two quite big William Holden speeches in the film to his wife and the Faye Dunaway character, where you feel that it isn't the character speaking, it is the writer, Paddy Chayefsky. And obviously, every muttered piece of dialogue, well, I suppose everything, in any cases there were where the characters were going, where the actors, were going off script. But obviously, for the most part, it's obviously a screenplay. But I just felt those moments, the film almost broke the fourth wall to me, where I felt that Paddy Chayefsky was like directly kind of making a big statement about life and whatnot, that this character simply didn't have within him, and I found it quite jarring, and I never have before. In no way, shape or form did this kind of detract from my love of it. My only, I suppose, one of the only criticisms I can have as well, the fact that I always feel like it ends very abruptly, which of course is, I think, part of the point. But overall, I really do enjoy Network. But I have to say, this was another Criterion UHD release that I actually think looks really quite poor. And Network is never a film that is going to be one for the kind of... It's not exactly a Terrence Malick film in terms of its... And it's taking part in office blocks mainly in a kind of dreary-looking New York. But dreary doesn't... But I thought that the UHD presence of the film was way too dark. I can't believe this was how it was supposed to look, or indeed looked when it was released. And we have to again talk about this teal turquoise regrading. And a lot of times you have a kind of yellow and green, and it's just, it looked mushy and poor to me. And this was again a double dip. I've got the Arrow Blu-ray of the film, and this is one of the rare ones. It hasn't been given a release in the UK, so I did have to pay for a little bit extra to be shipped over. And again, I'm going to go, yeah, it's got some great features on it, and the audio quality is fantastic. It is a mono release, but it did sound pretty great. And it does come with a load of features, including a 86-minute making of documentary. But for the most part, I was massively underwhelmed by this release of Network, and I just thought it should have been given a new given a restoration that was far more in keeping with what was originally intended, rather than again this horrible revisionism for modern audiences. But the release that has offended me most recently has to go to Criterion's release of John Borman's Point Blank. Now, Point Blank is one of my favourite films. It is a neo-noir, and it is one of the best-looking widescreen films that I can think of. I love how John Borman uses the scope frame, and I was really, really excited about picking this up on UHD. And my God, this is an absolute stinker of a release. It is legitimately terrible. The colour scheme for the film is completely awash with teal and orange again. And I actually do think that this detracts from the enjoyment of watching the film. I was really taken out of the film's narrative to look at what they had actually done. And it's terrible, and it comes under this banner of being director approved by John Borman. And I want to know. I want to see the process of this. Are they telling him this is what they're going to do, and he didn't actually see it, or I simply don't know. But it is atrocious to look at. Now, I own the Warner Brothers Blu-ray release of Point Blank, and it is infinitely better than this Criterion edition. Indeed, I cannot think of a reason why I would want to watch this presentation of the film again. And I do notice that I think it was on Blu-ray.com, they gave this one 2 out of 5, which I actually think is generous. Yes, I suppose the clarity of the image is somewhat better than that's gone before, and it does have some decent special features on the release, but I could not in any way, shape or form recommend picking this up. And that seems such a sad thing to say about Criterion, and I don't want to be too down on them, because obviously they do put out releases that are absolutely still tip top, but it just seems to be they're dropping the ball a lot, especially on these. And it seems the more leeway they get to kind of do their own thing, that the more they're bodging these up. And it's highly likely this will be the version of Point Blank that is, well, certainly on UHD for this foreseeable future. And it is a disgusting, gross mess. And it's not going to put me off purchasing Criterion releases, but certainly I think I might I think I might rent first before I decide to purchase, because again, I really felt like I just wasted £30, and more for me, I suppose. I could have seen the kind of the previews that were kind of cropping up online, things like Capaholics and stuff like that. But I was so eager to get this release, and I avoid. If you want to watch Point Blank, just get the Warner Brothers Blu-ray. That's out. You can pick it up for like a £5, I think, in certain places, especially on kind of resale sites and stuff. So far more cheaper. If you are interested in all things UHD and Blu-ray and talking about the transfers, I'm going to leave a couple of links to some really good YouTube channels that will help you. This one is called The Movie Collector, with a lovely guy called John, who is something of a home cinema enthusiast, who has a really great knowledge of various formats and whatnot, and does some really interesting experiments at home comparing like things like the DTS soundtracks of The Matrix from the original 35 presentation of the film to the Blu-ray and whatnot. And another one called Downfall Idealistic Crusade, which is a YouTube channel. I'm not sure what the guy's name is who hosts it, but he should be appointed, in my opinion, some sort of czar on film preservation. He's there is no way of denying it. The guy goes into film presentations on a level of nerdism which I think is off the scale. It's absolutely incredible. I could never ever. I'm in absolute awe of his knowledge and understanding of home releases and what ones you should bother with and what ones you shouldn't do. And I hope with this episode, I don't want to come across moany. It was just something that I'd picked up and wanted to discuss. But of course, it's not going to put me off collecting. I think I'll try before I buy in certain cases. And Criterion is obviously, it's still the label I think that has a very valuable part to play in physical media collection. It just seemed, I just wish they would kind of think about the purists rather than going for this modern take. But that is going to be it for this episode of the 24 Frames Cast. I'll be back next week. There is an episode coming which I'm really, really looking forward to presenting to you. It's been quite a while coming, and certainly it's taken a while to write, and but it's one that I'm really, really proud of. So many thanks for listening. If you want to get in contact, it's 24framescast@gmail.com, and I will be in contact soon. Many thanks. Bye.